Well spotted. So Anastasia, look, this is all very colorful, very dramatic stuff, isn't it? But at the end of the day, what can companies do to stay relevant? Because it seems to me that the resources, the skill sets can really contort and change businesses along the way. How can a business stay relevant to its audience and to its market in the midst of all this? What do you think?
We had this amazing discussion, right, beforehand, which focused on the most important skill set, I'd say, that we all humans, we all have, which is adaptability, right? We evolved developing tools and having tools that develop the tools, right? We were having that tension before
Adaptability.
Adaptability, that's right, and embracing the changes and questioning the status quo has been probably the most important state you should have as a company, especially with, again, all the AI development. You need to evolve and figure out. And honestly, as someone who runs not just this business, but also another business, I've been involved in AI agent building and figure out like how to build the next level of an organization. And I had to really restructure my thinking about the organization structure and think about more like a flat structure where people are more equal contributors on the projects. And so just really rethinking what you can do with AI and commercialization of space station, space architecture.
Right? I'm just going to be devil's advocate, if I may, Anastasia. You mentioned two incredibly powerful brands, Foster and SOM, Skidmore, Owings, Merrill. Now, I would say that they're no longer purely, they'll probably sue me for saying this, right? Yeah. They're no longer architectural firms. They're multidisciplinary practices of considerable scale and scope that are also world-class architects. Yes. Just as you have huge multidisciplinary titans who do architecture, design, and urban planning. Yep. But SOM and Foster are the other way round. They were originally architects, and now they're huge titans. Yes. So what I'm getting at here is how applicable are the initiatives you're talking about to companies that are 100 times smaller than those? How can architects here in the audience translate and transition earthbound skill sets into the opportunities you're talking about?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Although I mentioned in my talk where if you're a large company, it's definitely you can leverage your existing R&D budget and focus on strategic positioning and maybe consider joining a space architecture cohort of the firms. For smaller companies, I think one of the largest markets in space architecture is actually translating it into entertainment and film industry and educational. Like for example, there's this company that developed this Apollo capsule. Like it's kind of like a very heavily inspired design by Apollo capsule, but it has a really luxurious touch. And those capsules are sold, I believe, at $30,000 each, and it's sold to lounges. It's sold to museums and many other spaces. And I would say that the largest opportunity is really the space derivative innovations. If you talk about particularly like space architecture applications directly with NASA and with Emirates Space Program, you can also start as a space consultant. So like you focusing on your core capability. Let's say if you do renders, if your company just does renders, there is opportunity to transfer that skill into amazingly visually pleasing storytelling for future of humanity in space. And then it's all about persistence and continuously growing your capability. And once you secure that relationship with space companies and agencies, then you can grow your capability from there and have more and more responsibility with them.
One of the things that strikes me, Anastasia, was that you very helpfully gave the list of pre-existing requirements that the likes of NASA have broadly published really over the last 20 years. Part of those involve an incredible quest for sustainability that's probably, I'm exaggerating, but it's probably 100 times more stringent than any form of sustainability protocol we see for Earth-based architecture. What is the role of AI in ensuring that such complex criteria can be met, executed, and delivered? Surely AI is incredibly important in ticking all the boxes on those intensely challenging NASA requirements.
So your question is whether AI can be helpful
Absolutely.
with adaptation?
Absolutely.
I mean, AI kind of is thrown around sometimes as a gimmick, sometimes as something that is really valuable. And that's a good question. Like, if you can help me out with that.
Of course I can. Let's look at it the other way around. How developed at the moment are the urban plans and the cohort plans for building communities on Mars? And what has the engagement of AI protocols been in developing those?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, one of the products we've been deeply involved is autonomous decision-making for astronauts. So basically what it does, it extracts past mission data, so from like 1960s up to this day, and also it extracts data from manuals that astronauts have to read, and they're all normally printed out on paper. So we got all this data and fed the LLM, so then we can help astronauts to do more effective research in space, because their time is very valuable, and commercial companies, like pharmaceutical companies, they pay for their time for astronauts to be in space to perform their experiments. And this project has been the most challenging for sure, but also it might have the biggest potential impact, simply because if that works, you can have autonomous spacecraft that helps with astronauts just running it. And maybe if I may mention HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey, we might have that future. Hopefully AI will not be as evil as in the movie.
Interesting, interesting. So let's look more at that built environment on the Moon and Mars and so on. What are the kind of materials that we're going to be using there? Because in about 90 minutes' time, we have a panel session called Biomaterials, Is the Science Really Ready Yet?
Yeah.
So are these environments going to be built with, like, dare I say, green concrete, hemp concrete, new generation things like mycelium? What materials are going to be used, and how are we going to get them up there? Because these materials are heavy, and space transport is the most costly transport in the world. So what are we going to build with, and how will we actually get it there to build it? What do you think?
Wow, you have such good questions. Because this is the questions that we ask ourselves every day when we work on those projects. And so I would say last few years, like especially since 2016, companies like Forster and Partners and other, such as SOM, they've been focused on ISRU, which is In-Situ Resource Utilization. It's a funny abbreviation that NASA uses. And it's focused on how do you utilize local materials for building on the Moon and Mars and in space. And there's been extensive studies published on this. But people realize that for you to have that complex operation, right there, you need to have machinery, you need to have bring on many things. And there's been like later conversation last 2 years that, okay, we need to bring habitats with us. We want to be really as effective as possible. We want to pack everything. It's going to be probably metal cylindric habitats and or inflatables. So inflatables have been heavily proven that
yeah.
we still have inflatable module on the ISS as of right now. And so I would say it's always you bring your own shell, like the snail, it brings its own home with you. So it's very similar analogy with space architecture projects as of now. But if you're looking at more, I wouldn't even say 10 years, I would say maybe like even 50 years
Yeah.
of human presence in space. And when I say human presence in space, it's been mainly driven like more like astronauts operations versus civilian operations. So yeah, I would say that bringing your home with you, that's the talk of the day.
Yeah. Like yesterday, we were very privileged to have an incredible conversation with 3 directors of Atkins Realis. And one of the points that they made was that we tend to think about space urban planning and space architecture as something incredibly futuristic and amazing. But actually, it needs to be very basic in terms of catering to our amenities. You know, where's the gym? Where's the college? Where's the pub? You know, where do I take my kids to kindergarten? Where's the Amazon warehouse? You know, and I think that, as you rightly say, putting the key elements in place is going to take time. You know, we can use DALL-E or Midjourney to create the vision, but actually delivering the bits of our daily lifestyle, that could take some time.
I haven't had that many success with Midjourney or other AI tools to generate
Really?
a realistic habitation. It hasn't been doing a great job, yeah.
So what about the possibility of actually constructing things at all in a minimal, not a zero gravity, but a minimal gravity environment? Surely the machinery that's used is very different. We can't use internal combustion engines or diesel engines because NASA sustainability requirements only allows e-vehicles on those sites on an extraterrestrial platform. Mm-hmm. So how on earth are we going to build in a minimal gravity environment? Is it possible?
So there's the company called Maiden Space. I think they started in 2014. They had the first ever 3D printer in space to be able to print spare parts in space. And it has been proven very effective for bringing less tools with you and more, like if you can print printer with you, then it means you can print spare parts, so you can pack less with you. Like lesser suppliers means more time you can spend on space, more food, more provisions. And but the problem is printing in space, it's a long way to go. It's not as great, it's not as precise as it here. And I would say that 3D printing is a technology that it's still, my opinion, is underdeveloped here on Earth.
I agree. I think areas like 3D printing, modular construction, sustainable high-resin glues, and things of that kind are going to see massive development in the next 7 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. But again, they are very underdeveloped at the moment. And I would hazard a guess through conversations with yourself and with Atkins Realis that one of the ways forward is indeed through using 3D printed modular construction held together with sustainable resins. So you're just cutting concrete mixes, however sustainable or however green they may or not be. They're just cut out of the equation completely. Yeah. And similarly, you're saving massive weight on transport because all you're bringing there are the magic ingredients and the 3D printers. That's all you're bringing up there.
Yep.
Yeah. So what would be the transition stages? Let's say within the audience here today, there are, and we know this for an absolute fact, there are 10 or 12 architectural practices that arguably have reached a considerable critical mass. You know, they're creating projects for some of the largest developers in the GCC. Mm-hmm. They're creating multi-entity, mixed-use, multi-use projects of huge scale. If they were interested in taking this leap, what would the practical steps be for them to transition towards competitive tenders for space architecture? What would they have to do next?
First, it's not a sure thing, I would say. So things take time, especially for space projects, and as companies present here involved in large-scale projects, they all know that they need to have patience. If you're seriously considering joining and diversifying your capabilities, you need to sit down and think about the transferable capabilities you have. And as I mentioned, it could be within the software development, within BIM, within hardware development, human factors development. There's just so many things. What I personally do in running this company is I always identify the highest ROI possible. So if we compete for this grant, and what's the likelihood of us winning that? So just focus on that, and we'll pursue it. And
so within, for instance, BIM and Revit currently, is the capacity and the matrix scope available to start planning digital twins of the scope and incredible intensity of detail that a community on Mars would require? Would we use Revit? How would we actually go about creating that modeling in the first place? How would we do that?
Revit is widely used in the industry, as well as rhinoceros. I would say Revit will likely be more used as we grow. I would restructure this question differently. I would get into conversations with decision-making folks and really understand. It's less about the tools that you use and more about what challenge you're solving. So let's say, the way for you to decide also what to work on is go to NASA Human Research Program website, and they have a published roadmap saying, okay, in 10 years, this is the problems that have to be solved. Okay, in 20 years, this is the problems have to be solved. And then you scope down and see what are the solutions you can provide. And then you need to engage with the points of contacts that are responsible for those, solving those challenges that can consult you on figure out how you can be helpful, right? And this type of projects that is enormous, build that you have to do, right? Those, again, they will take years or maybe decades to flourish, but, Mars habitation, if we have a settlement of not just astronauts, but civilians, we will have a really, really smart system. I'll call it smart home for Mars, right? And you might have the largest market share, if you be able to consistently deliver. And in the beginning, it starts with a consultancy from points of contacts that are responsible for that particular challenge.
I noticed in your presentation you used that marvelous phrase from Michael Porter, competitive advantage. What is the competitive advantage that a multidisciplinary practice or even a multidisciplinary titan can gain from engagement now in space architecture and space project design? What is the competitive advantage that they can reap from getting involved in this now?
Well, as I mentioned before, there's enormous opportunity for R&D, not just direct applications in space technology, but also technologies that are derived from space. And sometimes you might even make more money producing a movie about your process versus the actual project itself. Sometimes it happens, right? The content production is part of it, especially with influencers market growing up. And I believe there's bigger companies joining that trend where marketing, like if you're serious about marketing, you join like more like influencer and storytelling business. And there's museum exhibitions, there are space-inspired furniture, there's many avenues. I would say that the time is, like I can't emphasize enough, the time is like the things are happening right now, and right now is the most critical time to join the developments in low Earth orbit, the moon, and potentially Mars. Because if you join the moon developments, moon is a testbed for Mars. And if you're successful with the moon, I'm telling you 100%, you're gonna be building projects on Mars and getting all these huge RFPs.
If you were to describe and define in one sentence the opportunity here in 2025 to get into the race to build space architecture, how would you define that opportunity?
Well, okay, so for this year, the most critical component of space architecture is happening in commercial LEO destinations. So I mentioned before, there's multiple companies competing against each other. And there's actually a newcomer called Vast Space. It's a self-funded startup that, well, I can't even call it a startup. They got like $700 million from a founder. And they're also building a private space station. And this year they have one of the design reviews, like later in October, November, when NASA will decide this year who is gonna get another chunk of funding, right? And if you can position yourself as an architecture firm, if you can position yourself as someone who can solve their problems and fill the gap, because NASA is looking into lesser about research facility, which is important, right? But they're looking into, how would this space station will be commercially viable and what kind of experiences you're gonna provide there? How can you attract and create demand in those space stations? Because it's not like, you're gonna build it and people will come. No, it's the opposite. You need to really figure out who is gonna come. Is it gonna be just the billionaires that can afford these flights? Or it's gonna be very much different and it's gonna be so much affordable. There's gonna be such a casual thing to do is like going to low Earth orbit and having your vacation there.
Anastasia, myself and my colleague Priyanka Raina curate the Future of Architecture Summit, and our mission, as it were, each year is to push it further to cross boundaries that we've never crossed before in terms of content. And I can't thank you enough for helping us cross perhaps the most critical and important content boundary of all in the summit this year. I just want to say it's an absolute privilege to talk to you and to see you here. Please, a huge round of applause for Anastasia Prosina. Thank you very much indeed.